Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 22nd and tonight's movie is Repulsion. Before we get started, let's address the elephant in the room. This movie was directed by Roman Polanski, who's one of those people where you need to separate the art from the artist in order to enjoy his work with a clear conscience. Nothing about me making this video is meant to excuse, ignore, or minimize anything that he has done. And if you don't even know what I'm talking about, that's fine. Don't worry about it. We're just gonna move on. Anyway, I did watch and review Rosemary's Baby for the 2018 Horror Nights video, and this movie was made right before that, only 3 years prior. Repulsion is a movie in black and white, and it's about a young woman who, in some way or another, is losing her mind. The trailer was kind of vague about it. The trailer was also very old school. It had like that male PSA sounding kind of voice. It had the music. I think it even had the same text effects. Anyway, this movie seems to be very psychologically based with a little bit of eroticism as well. There's a lot of talk about like the way that she sees men and the way that men see her. The movie stars Catherine Deneuve, who is basically acting royalty. I had a few problems with Rosemary's Baby, but that was mostly due to the story, and that was an adapted story. This one seems to be an original. Now I'm gonna go see just how repulsing this movie really is. As a movie, Repulsion was interesting. I would say it's more interesting than it was good, but I think there is enough interesting to sort of put it out on top. I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. One thing I noticed about this movie is that it has this very specific vibe. The way it looks and the way it sounds makes me feel like it should be on MST3K. The music especially gives me very Manos, Hands of Fate, Beast of Yucca Flats, Monster of Go-Go vibes. But that contrasts harshly with the fact that you can tell everybody behind this movie actually knows what they're doing. The only real cracks in that is from Catherine Deneuve's performance, and I don't blame that on her being a bad actress. I'm blaming that on the fact that she was not very fluent in English at the time. This comparison might not mean much to you, but they make her performance made me think of those girls in anime, like those little girls who have like this weird like spacey voice, and like they just talk weird and they don't really sound like a human, just like that. She doesn't do as much talking as you would expect, so there are a lot of moments where her acting prowess can come through, but when she talks, it sounds like she's kind of asleep. Or maybe that was all completely intentional, I don't know. When it comes to horror, there were some actually disturbing things in this movie, and there were a few jump scares in this movie that got me. Because Repulsion, it doesn't move in the way that the average horror movie does. It's not paced the way the average horror movie is paced. There's just something off about it. Rosemary's Baby was a lot more standardized and Americanized, but Repulsion feels like a dream sequence almost. One of those dreams that starts out seeming realistic, but then gradually becomes a horrible nightmare. And there's no context for any of it. Usually they give us a little bit of backstory or like hint at some child trauma, but as far as I can tell, we're not given any explanation or hint as to how the main character, Carol, got to be the way that she is. And considering how bad it gets, I don't think that just happens by itself. One thing I noticed a lot in Repulsion is something I also noticed to a lesser extent in Rosemary's Baby. There is quite the penchant for really long shots. And most of the movie takes place in this one apartment, so it almost feels like a stage play that was made into a movie. And while there are ultimately a lot of good things in Repulsion, I think that if you want to see like a descent into madness done in an older movie, I would recommend The Haunting. This movie came early in this filmmaker's career, and it does kind of show. It's not bad, but aside from a few moments, it's not necessarily anything to write home about. Now I want to talk about some spoilers. The main thing, the catalyst for this descent into madness, is that Carol is living with her sister, and her sister leaves the apartment for 2 weeks, and she's alone in the house. I guess she's never been alone with her own madness for that long before this. There seems to be two parts to her descent. The first part is that she seems to have like nervous habits, little tics, and she has a lot of stuff that's reminiscent of what we think of as OCD. Like she really wants things to be clean. When she sees, for example, she sees like a crack in a door frame, she's like, "We need to get this fixed right now." And throughout the movie, you see like walls and parts of it like crack in the apartment. And the second is generalized paranoia. She has a lot of nightmares about being sexually assaulted. And probably the most famous scare in the movie, and the one that got me the most, is one where, like, black painted hands literally come out of the wall and try to, like, grope her. In her paranoia, she ends up murdering two men. And, like, she's at the point where she's, like, not too far gone that she doesn't realize she did something deeply wrong, but, like, not present enough to actually like try to go get some help. She still refuses to leave the apartment. Then there's a bunch of weird like small things. There was this thing where there was like a rabbit was going to be cooked, but dinner got canceled that night, so it was just in the fridge. So she just takes it out and just like leaves it in the living room until it rots and gets eaten by flies. And then there's a part where she's humming to herself, ironing something, but the iron isn't even plugged in. We don't actually see what ends up happening to her. It just sort of cuts to her sister and her sister's lover, because apparently he's married and she's taking part in an affair. They come back and then they see the apartment is a complete mess. There is a dead body in the bathtub. There's another dead body under an upturned couch. And Carol is under the bed, unconscious. And the movie ends with her being taken away. We don't know what ultimately happens to her. We don't know what her sister said or thought about it. We don't know if she ever gets charged for killing two people. Much like everything before this movie, everything after is just left up to interpretation. Maybe it was the language barrier. Maybe it was because it was early in the director's career. But there is a lot of talent in Repulsion, but a lot of times the movie gets in its own way. And I brought up the language barrier again because at the time, the director didn't know that much English either. Rosemary's Baby was definitely a more solid movie from beginning to end. Repulsion is more like a fever dream or an acid trip, which I know some people might love, but I don't really. And that's about it. Thank you for listening.